Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, your podcast helping your family cruise a little smarter. And I'd like to welcome you back to the show all the way down in Florida. How are you doing today, Christy?
I am well, Steve. How are you?
Not too bad. What if I told you it was 5 o'clock somewhere?
Oh my God. I would be looking for my margarita or my frou-frou drink.
Well, we have got a special guest on today, and I did not even know this cruise line was coming into existence. They only have one ship right now, but Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville has a new resort down in the Orlando area. I knew about that just opened. Have you heard much about that, Christy?
Oh yeah, it's pretty awesome. And there's actually other Margaritaville resorts around as well, not just the one in Orlando.
So I'd like to welcome to the show, first time on the DCL podcast. How are you doing today, Dani?
I am great. Fins up.
Fins up. I love it. You are an editor for 2 publications before we jump into this review of Margaritaville at Sea. Could you give our listeners a little background of yourself?
Sure. So I am editor of Orlando Date Night Guide, which has been around for a long number of years. And then I am also becoming editor of a publication that's coming out soon, Orlando Parenting, because our group has Tampa Bay Parenting, Tampa Bay Date Night Guide. So now it's time to complete that portfolio with Orlando Parenting. But prior to that, I did a lot of freelance writing. And so my experience with Margaritaville at Sea was actually through Attractions Magazine. And that is where a review and a video of the experience is available now on their website. So this was like my last hoorah with Attractions Magazine, at least for a while, since my plate is becoming quite full with the editing world.
That's awesome. We'll make sure that we put a link in that in the show notes. And I think that what you're ready for now, Christy needs a lot of help with parenting and date nights, right, Christy?
Yeah. In there, does it talk about finding a babysitter? Because that is my biggest problem with having a date night in Orlando.
Amen. I know. I go through the same thing. So we'll help each other out as we find resources.
Well, let's turn to this sailing on Margaritaville at Sea. Before we talk about this sailing, Dani, could you give us a little background on your cruising background? Have you sailed with Disney, which is kind of the focus of our podcast, but other cruise lines as well?
Absolutely. So I've been on every Disney cruise vessel aside from the Fantasy, and I'm very excited to share that I'll be on the Wish as part of the media event there. So got that news last week and about jumped through the attic in my house.
Yes.
So I've done every Disney cruise ship except the Fantasy. I did also work aboard Disney Cruise Line as a Disney Vacation Club representative, which is different than crew does. Yeah.
No, we know that position very well. We've had people on before that's done that. We are all about that. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. So that was super cool. That was many, many moons ago. And then I have sailed with Norwegian. I did an inaugural cruise with the Encore. So that was really neat. So I've now attended 2 cruise christenings in my life and will be attending a 3rd at the end of June. So, hey. So I've got that experience. Margaritaville at Sea was definitely the smallest experience that I've had thus far.
And just to kind of bring everybody in before we start talking about this, was this a media event cruise too for you that you went on? Was this one of the first ones? Because I know that they just started sailing, right?
Correct. Yeah. So this is a little bit strange because it was just one night. So it was a media experience, and then there was VIPs from Margaritaville. There were VIPs from the cruise line that originally owned the ship. There was all kinds of different folks on this, but it was not a traditional sailing. This cruise is just 2 nights, whereas this particular media experience was just one overnight experience.
Well, let's talk about Margaritaville at Sea then. So they just started sailing. They're sailing out of Port Canaveral. Am I correct?
They are sailing out of Port of Palm Beach.
Okay.
Which is also kind of interesting, to think about kind of who they would be going after by sailing out of that port. Because it's definitely not a major one. And that was the only cruise ship that was there, at least on the day of the event. As far as I'm aware, there really are no other cruise ships that sail right out of this port, because it's actually more of like a commercial barges, shipping barges, those type of things. In fact, as the ship is sitting in port, to the right of us, we were just watching cars and things being crushed and like loaded onto a barge of some kind. So that definitely took away from the vibes for a minute. But it does also overlook Peanut Island, which is a cool little South Florida boating party kind of area. So if you look to the left, it looked fantastic. If you look to the right, it was, oh my gosh, what is this?
Before you board that cruise, for people who might be going out on it, I remember after you got off, you posted a video being very excited about going to a Florida watering hole type place, some like restaurant that was very exciting to you.
Yeah, so that area, thankfully for me, I'm fairly familiar. My best friend used to live down in that area, so I would go visit her quite a bit. So it's near Jupiter, which is very pretty. There's a couple of like kind of barrier little islands that are all connected through an offshoot off of A1A. So there's real pretty like condo buildings and vacation homes and things like that. And then the place that I went to is called Guanabanas. And that's in Jupiter, and it's the entire restaurant is outdoors. So it's just one of my favorite spots in the area. I don't know if I would say, this is a destination that, you've definitely got to spend 2 nights at before you get on the ship. If you wanted to do an overnight there and enjoy that area, there's a handful of nice things to do, but it's not it's not that same draw that like Port Canaveral has, being so close to Disney and Cocoa Beach and that sort of thing.
Well, let's circle back. You kind of hit on it there for just a second, but who do you see this cruise line marketing to?
Definitely Parrot Heads, which is what I am. I've been to 6 or 7 Jimmy Buffett concerts. Nice. I've stayed at a handful of different Margaritaville resorts. So this is definitely, at least for this first iteration, this first ship, definitely Parrot Heads. I don't foresee any major cruise enthusiasts being excited or drawn in by this first iteration. They have said that they absolutely have every intention to expand this and do other ships and other destinations. But for this first one, it being a 2-night cruise down to Grand Bahama Island, I would not recommend it for folks that are used to other cruise lines. If somebody wants to just experience it, just to have a quick and easy and fairly budget-friendly cruise, it definitely solves that, even if you're not a Parrot Head.
And we were kind of talking about it ahead of time. I know the Margaritaville, I don't even know what it's called, Christy, but the resort area there near Walt Disney World has become pretty popular with people. Like the different accommodations that they have, the outdoor water facilities that people can enjoy their time with there. It's become pretty popular, and I think it transcends beyond that Parrot Head kind of vibe. Well, not the vibe. That's not the right word to say it, but just, you don't have to be a Parrot Head to want to stay there. I think families are starting to be drawn to that as well. So to your point, maybe as they expand the cruise line, maybe that's a way that they can take it.
And one of the things that I mentioned in the review on Attractions Magazine, as well as the video I did for them, is that the very first Margaritaville hotel that ever existed, which is the Margaritaville Pensacola Beach Hotel, that is a very similar scenario to this cruise ship. It was a hotel that operated under a different brand. It was a slightly older hotel. And so Margaritaville bought it, renovated it, added all the Margaritaville branding that's now become so identifiable. Back then, they didn't have a hotel. This was the first one. So I see this first cruise ship in that same way, that it's the one to get them started, to kind of test things out, feel things out. But if we look 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it'll be a much different offering from this brand. Now you've got the Margaritaville Times Square. You've got Margaritaville Hollywood Beach Resort. You've got a Margaritaville in Palm Springs. They're all over the place, and they're massive resorts, many of them, compared to this one little single hotel that they started from.
They're really building on that brand, aren't they? Well, let's talk about the ship itself. I think it's the same size as the Magic and the Wonder, if you're familiar. I think like just looking at the amount of staterooms and the size of the ship itself, what was it like? What was the ship itself like when you got on board?
And I looked at that because the capacity of the Margaritaville at Sea Paradise, which is what this first ship is called, is right around 1,600, if I remember correctly. It's in the blog post. I wish I had pulled it up. But I believe the capacity of the Magic and the Wonder is around 2,200.
Yeah, so just a little bit smaller.
There are a lot of dining outlets. There are a lot of lounges. There's 2 pools. It didn't feel as big as the Magic and Wonder. Even, obviously it's slightly smaller, but it just felt a lot smaller to me. I also have not really been on a ship that old before. The ship has been running since 1991. So that's older than the Magic and Wonder. And the Magic and Wonder have been through, extensive refurbishments. This ship, the Margaritaville at Sea Paradise, certainly went through a big makeover. However, there were also still plenty of instances of the previous ships, not necessarily branding, but like they didn't change some of the directional signage. The elevators still end their announcements in Italian. There was the license to chill bar, which is where I got my first margarita on board. I looked to my right and there was still a sign that said the Portofino bar or some, whatever the previous branding was. So it did not feel as Margaritaville as it could have. However, they put all of that branding into the bars, as you might imagine. And then the cabins were definitely very well branded.
I want to ask about the cabins, but before I do, I did look it up and it looks like it's about 30,000 gross tons smaller. I mean, that's like a third of the ship. So that's kind of significant.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely felt it. And I know, there's nothing necessarily wrong with small ships. They serve a purpose. And that's kind of what this does. There's a reason why they only are doing 2-night cruises. And they've said that this particular ship will always do short 2-night cruises. And if they're going to expand to longer itineraries, they will have a different ship for that.
You did talk about the cabins were themed to the Margaritaville.
Before you jump into the cabins, Christy, I got to tell Dani the story really quick. The very first cruise I went on was a Norwegian cruise line, and it was on the Jade out of Venice. And we went to Croatia and then down to Athens in Greece. And the Jade was originally built to service the Hawaiian Islands. And because of the downturn, they took her out of the Hawaiian Islands. She never sailed there, but the entire ship, when we sailed around Europe, was themed to Hawaii. And when you went into the main dining room, they had a giant statue of King Kamehameha there. And it was just like all just tropical stuff. So here we were going around so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Anyways, okay, on to the staterooms, Christy. I'm sorry.
That's a lovely segue, Steve. So to the staterooms, they're well themed, but you've been on other cruise lines, you've been on Disney. Obviously, Disney knows how to make a stateroom and how to make a stateroom comfortable. How would you describe the stateroom on the Margarita at Sea? Was it comfortable? Were the beds comfortable?
The beds were definitely comfortable. The furnishings were sufficient. The hard goods, the case goods, which would be like the dresser, the closet, those were the same from the previous operator of the ship. They did essentially a makeover of the decor. So you have a Jimmy Buffett lyric, "Nothing but a breeze." As soon as you walk in, it's the accent wall that you see as soon as you walk into the cabin. And that's the thing, you'll hear me say cabin as opposed to stateroom, as well as in the review and the video, because these are truly cabins. When you think of the Disney cruise, that's a stateroom. That's got a luxurious feel to it. It really feels like a nice hotel room that happens to be on a cruise ship, versus this was a comfortable place to sleep. It had what I needed, but I didn't feel like I was walking into a very nice resort hotel room. I did equate it to the Compass by Margaritaville brand, which is their very small select service number of hotels. So kind of like a Courtyard by Marriott versus a resort Marriott. So the Compass by Margaritaville hotels, there's only a handful of them, and they're select service. So they're not big, huge resorts with all of these different amenities. But for my family, we can't necessarily afford a Margaritaville resort. I wish we could afford more Disney cruises, but we really can't. So this is much more within our budget. And that's the whole thing, is if someone is looking for a quick getaway, if they, they want to have an extended weekend or whatever the case may be, it's going to fit that. And the cabin accomplishes that. Now, the thing that was very disappointing for myself and a lot of folks on this particular media cruise, and I've been seeing it with the first couple of regular sailings, is the bathroom. So the shower is in a corner and it's a capsule, so to speak, and it's just a shower curtain. So the entire bathroom floor was soaked when I took my shower.
Definitely like the old timer cruise cabins from the past.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I can get why it would have been a huge undertaking to, gut all of that and put in a more standard shower. But gosh, it really would have been nice.
Yeah.
And a couple other folks mentioned that they did have some difficulties with the bathroom, functioning toilet, that sort of thing. So the folks,
like an important feature.
Yes, indeed.
I definitely remember from my youth, from those few cruises I did before I even turned 18, where it was literally the joke and the thing, like the Premier Cruise Line ship. And then I was on this little guy called the Dolphin Cruise Line. And it was like, the joke was from back then in the 80s and really early 90s, but mostly the 80s, right? That you can like go potty, wash your hands, and wash your feet in the shower all at the same time, because that's how small the bathrooms were. And I'm guessing this is close to that size still.
Yeah, I mean, the size itself was sufficient. There was counter space. If I had, I'm a very low maintenance girl. But if I had product and makeup and lots of things, there would have been plenty of room for that. It's just the shower itself. It's just a little capsule in the corner and a shower curtain that didn't do anything. And in my particular case, I couldn't get any other temperature to come out of the faucet other than scalding hot. So I was literally like turning the shower on for a quick moment to get my hair wet, turning it off, putting shampoo in my hair, turning it back on, rinsing it off, and then getting the heck out of Dodge. So I didn't go into that much detail in the review and the video for good reason, I guess. But
well, hopefully they sort that out. And I feel like that's the type of thing that can get sorted out, because, get some engineers in there to actually fix that kind of stuff. And we've resolved that. But I want to get to the good stuff. When I think Margaritaville, I think of slushy cocktails and tailgating before concerts, Jimmy Buffett songs everywhere, and just a great time. I want to hear about the food. I want to hear about the entertainment. Obviously, you were on a one-night media cruise, so it's not quite normal, but usually they would tell you what is normal, right? So like, what would be normal?
Yeah. So I will say, walking into the port, huge Parrot Head fan. I was very, very excited. I got teary-eyed just seeing the Margaritaville branding on a cruise ship, because it just makes sense. But then walking into the lobby of the port, they were playing, Cheeseburger in Paradise and different Margaritaville montage stuff on the video screens. And I very much felt like, all right, yes, this is the vibe. This is what I'm looking for. The included food, there's 2 outlets at which your food is included. And then there are 3 additional outlets that would be additional pricing. So the included outlets is Finn's Dining, which is the main dining room, and then the Port of Indecision buffet. So that is going to be your breakfast option on board. And then Finn's is available for dinner. I am not certain, and I'll have to go back and find this out, which of the 2 would then be an included lunch option. Is it the buffet or is it the main dining room? So I apologize for not having that info. The additional charges for dining, there's the JWB Prime Steakhouse, which I would definitely recommend if someone's going to go on this cruise, they go ahead and make that something that they're going to do. It's $59 per person, which is a little higher than what I'm used to. I think that's even more than Palo, right? Maybe right on par with the cost of Palo on a Disney cruise. But the quality of the steak, the quality of the sides, the quality of really everything is on par with a steakhouse you would go to at a resort or at any sort of specialty dining location at any city. Great wine selection, great steak. So that to me would be worth it. It's kind of a shame that you have to now budget, the additional cost to do this, but to me, it's definitely worth it. There's also a pizzeria on board where you can order a pizza. It's $14 plus or minus, depending on, the specialty toppings and that sort of thing. I believe that's just left over from the previous ship. And so they converted it to Frank and Lola's Pizzeria, which is, again, a Margaritaville Jimmy Buffett song. There's a Margaritaville coffee shop, which every Margaritaville resort has. So you can get specialty coffee for $3 to $5, again, depending. And then all of the lounges are going to be additional, but they do have drink packages. It was like $80 for, I think, a 10 drink package. So really not a bad deal. And those were very well themed. That is definitely where they put all of the capital spend, is to theme those areas. So you have the 5 o'clock somewhere bar. They do have food there as well. And it's right next to the Port of Indecision buffet. So anything you would order at the 5 o'clock somewhere bar would be additional. And it's actually a really cool space. It's at the very back of the ship. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like Cabanas, the outdoor seating at Cabanas. It overlooks the ocean, very highly themed area. There's the License to Chill bar. That is a smaller bar, but again, they did a decent job of theming that. That is the one that still had one of the old signs, the Portofino bar, or whatever the case may be. Then there was the 12 volt bar, which is outdoors, and it's near the adults only pool. So there's only 2 pools on the ship, and one of them is adults only. And it is actually the larger of the 2 pools, which kind of makes sense for this experience. So those 3 bars, the 12 volt, License to Chill, 5 o'clock somewhere bar, are all kind of near each other, and definitely the most popular hangout, have a margarita, have a pina colada type place. And then there's the Euphoria Lounge, which is in the center of the ship inside. And that's where they did a lot of the adult entertainment after the main show.
For the dining packages and stuff like that, is that something you book ahead of time, or is that something you do once you get on board the ship?
You can book the drink packages ahead of time. As of right now, there is not any sort of online booking for JWB Prime Steakhouse. And then the other, like the pizzeria, you purchase a la carte. There is no actual dining package that you could purchase that then would include the upgraded dining.
And since we're in the 2000s, I'm assuming there's no pop tops anywhere near on the pool bar or around the pool areas or anything like that people are going to step on.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about stepping on a pop top and busting your flip flop.
Well, any other questions about dining or the bars, Christy, before we talk about entertainment?
No.
Okay, let's talk about the entertainment then. It sounds like they have one main show and then some adult entertainment either before, during the day, or after the show. What are they offering on board?
So the show is really, really cool. It is called Jim. It actually has kind of 2 names. So they call it Jimmy's Ship Show, Tales from Margaritaville. I had to really slow down on that one. We don't want to have to do the bleep button. So Tales from Margaritaville is actually one of Jimmy Buffett's fictional stories that he's written. It's a book he came out with, I want to say 15 years ago. And he also had a Broadway musical. It was on Broadway, then it went off Broadway. Now it's no longer. And so it's kind of evolved into this ship show, which is 45 minutes. And it was also produced by Frank Marshall. So you may know Frank Marshall working on a couple different Steven Spielberg movies. He and Jimmy Buffett have been friends for years. I'm not quite sure how they became friends, but it's cool that they are. Frank Marshall was actually on the media cruise, so we got to see him kind of cheering on the cast doing the show. And so this 45-minute show is very colorful, very vibrant. It takes a little bit of the Tales from Margaritaville book and introduces you to the main character, Tully Mars, as well as some of the other characters. And then they sing different versions of Jimmy Buffett songs. And so it's neat to hear these different renditions. Cheeseburger in Paradise started off like kind of jazzy, almost disco-y. It was kind of weird for a minute, but I really dug it. Of course, I'm a Jimmy Buffett nerd, so they could have done anything and I probably would have been happy. But it is very entertaining, and I definitely would recommend it. Even for folks that aren't big Jimmy Buffett fans, I think that it's just a fun show. And the performers, they really put their heart into it. And in fact, the performance I saw, which was the 7:30 one, there's two different performances. That particular one was the first time they'd ever done it while the ship was in motion. So it was kind of cool to see the performers navigating just a little bit. Since it is a smaller ship, it definitely it gets moving when it goes through those Florida Straits that first night. So, and then there is different game shows and trivia, and they did after the main show, I think it was about at like 10 o'clock at night in the Euphoria Lounge, they did Cowgirl versus Cowboy in the Jungle. So it was kind of your typical battle of the sexes. You know, the men had to go find these, you know, did a passenger have this thing or that thing? The females had to, you know, does the passenger have this thing or can you name this thing? And definitely being at 10 o'clock at night, folks were very well lubricated from the various drinks available at the bars. So it made for a few funny moments.
Did they have a lot of music around the ship then too? I would think that, you know, just because it's Jimmy Buffett, that like in the different lounges and stuff, did they have people playing?
They did have a performer in the Euphoria Lounge as folks were heading to dinner or heading to the first show. I didn't actually see any other performers. However, they also did grant us a Jimmy Buffett concert. He actually was on board the ship and performed when the ship sailed away before the ship sailed away for the first time. He got the heck out of Dodge before the ship actually sailed away. So I don't know if because of that, you know, they didn't have as much entertainment as they normally would have. I did see there is an area, a stage by the main pool. And then there's another bar called the Oasis Room, and that has room for a stage as well. So certainly can imagine they would have a lot of live music there. Then in the morning, there was a gentleman on the guitar doing Jimmy Buffett cover songs in the main lounge as well.
Do you know, is there any plans to have Jimmy Buffett like do certain concerts before Sail Away in the future?
I don't think so.
Okay. Bummer.
He is known to, I know, right? And he is known to show up once in a while. You know, every once in a while he'll show up at the Margaritaville Cafe in Key West, which was the first one. He does have a music studio down there, but it is kind of tradition for him to kick off any of these new type of offerings. When the retirement communities started and each one would grand open, he has performed there. The New York hotel, when that opened, he performed there. So it is kind of tradition, at least for grand openings, for him to be there. I tell you, I was a happy little parrot head. I was about 15 feet away from him, and I was not moving from that spot if my life depended on it. So
that would be amazing to see him someplace, especially down in I've only seen him in Tacoma, so that's not quite this is the place where you can think about going to see Jimmy Buffett, right? But
he's been to Detroit quite a bit, and I have a group of friends that we would do these epic tailgates, and man, Detroit gets into it. So
I'm
he
sure
was at like Comerica Park once, but that was the least fun probably of them. The rest of them is this little like outdoor theater 45 minutes from Detroit and just in the middle of the country. And everybody just sits in the parking lot for like 5 hours before the concert and, you know, has themselves a good time. People bring everything and blow up pools, and it's just so much fun. So
I don't think you can bring your own blow up pool on the Margaritaville at Sea Paradise, but you know, you talking about tailgating. I'm sorry, real quick. I want to make sure I don't miss this. At the Port of Palm Beach, it is valet parking only. So that is something to note. It was nice to just kind of drop your car off, but they did have trouble when you picked up the car the next morning. There was a long line, but they did say during regular sailings that you'll have a scheduled time to try and help with that.
So I get two quick questions. One, is this a cruise that you think families would be able to go on? You know, maybe families with younger kids. My kids are a little bit older now, 12 and 16. I think that this is a cruise that I could easily take them on because they can kind of entertain themselves in some spaces. But is this a cruise that you think younger families would go on?
So that is a great question. That's something I really thought about because I have a 4.5-year-old. And before the cruise, I actually reached out to Christy to see about booking one. And after experiencing it, I don't think families with younger kids would really benefit from this particular offering. Now, what I would suggest is that they offer land and sea vacations a little bit different than what you might think. You would get on the ship for the first night, and then when you arrive at Grand Bahama Island the second day, you can, rather than doing, a variety of excursions, you can actually go to one of 2 different all-inclusive resorts that they partner with and stay for a few nights, enjoy that experience. And then when the ship comes back on a different sailing, then you get back on the ship and you enjoy one more night on the ship itself. And so I would recommend that for younger families because, for one night, you'll be okay to entertain your little guy on the Margaritaville at Sea ship. They do have kids clubs. We didn't get to see them, and I peeked through the windows and they really didn't look that impressive. But of course, I had to kind of take off my Disney lens and, remind myself that it's not going to be anywhere near close to that.
And,
So,
I have experienced the kids clubs on Celebrity Cruise Line, and I always say they work harder for the crew entertains the child instead of the room, whereas Disney has the room mostly. I mean, they have great crew that work very hard, great staff, but the room doesn't have to or the staff doesn't necessarily even have to entertain your kid because the room can, right? Like all the activities, all the stuff is on kids. Celebrity, they have room. They have a kids club. Maybe it's nicer than Margaritaville at Sea, not sure, but their staff works so much harder to make sure they're entertaining the kids. So it would be interesting to hear as more ships go out and kids are in those kids clubs to see, do they fall into that category where maybe the staff work extra hard because the room only has so much to provide.
Right. Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I will say every crew member I interacted with was amazing. As you might expect, the bartenders were definitely the star of the show. So I can imagine, that is one thing that I've experienced at any Margaritaville property I've stayed at is they really have, talked to their staff about having that warm, friendly, hey, you're on vacation. Let's make sure you have a really great time. They have that personality anytime I've gone to any Margaritaville product. So I could see that being the case. So certainly, if you were to do that land and sea bit where your young one is entertained at the kids club for a little bit, and then maybe you go to one of these all-inclusive resorts. I checked both of them and they both do have, different activities and things for the whole family. And then you get back on the ship for one more night. So That to me sounds like a lot of fun. Definitely older kids, I think, for a 2-night experience, they would have a good time. There's not a whole lot of like outdoor activities. There's not like a big basketball court or mini golf or that type of thing. So those things are missing. It really would be more about just kind of hanging around on the ship and not doing a whole lot.
So the Margaritaville at Sea only sails to one particular harbor. I love the idea. I had to throw that in there.
Nice job.
Yeah, I love the idea of that land and sea vacation. That is really cool. I mean, I would love to do something like that, in all honesty, even with my family being a little bit older, like going over there and spending a couple of days on the islands. Do they partner with some of the different organizations on the islands to do shore excursions too? Did they promote that at all?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So they do have a couple different shore excursions, kind of the typical dolphin swim, that sort of thing. And then because it is in the Bahamas area, they do have the swim with the pigs option as well, which I have done through Norwegian. It's fun. It's silly. I'm glad I did it once. I don't know if I need to do it again. Some great photo opportunities, but I would probably take a look at like one of the dolphin experiences, or maybe hanging out on one of the local beaches and that sort of thing. So they do have those type of excursions. And then again, those two resorts you can either stay at, or they do have a handful of like day pass type of things where if you are just doing the 2 nights, then you can go to the resort and use some of the amenities and then get back on the ship that night.
Well, I think you've convinced me. I think this is a cruise I'd like to try. What about you, Christy?
Yeah, no, this sounds like a ton of fun. Maybe it can be a date night cruise.
And that is exactly it. I would definitely recommend it for couples to, if they're the kids' activities would be sufficient to keep the kids entertained, or if you're able to have a family member or a friend or whatever, watch the kids for 2 nights and you go on an adult sailing for 2 nights, then that is definitely the way to do it.
Yeah, it sounds like the perfect escape for a couple to get away for a couple nights there. Dani, thinking back on this cruise then, and just thinking about the overall product, Margaritaville at Sea, what did we miss, or what else did you want to point out that we didn't talk about?
I would just say overall, we didn't talk about the casino. It is kind of just a basic casino. It is themed to Margaritaville. It's called the Paradise Casino, but paradise like the dice that you throw. But in terms of like the games and the card, lots of puns. But the games and the card tables and everything are not new. They're not rethemed. They are, I imagine, what was on the ship prior. There is decor on the walls and things for Margaritaville, but none of the games or any of those experiences were changed over. But it is important to point out that is an activity you can do. I will say, it is a great experience, again, for a quick getaway. It is a great experience if you either love Margaritaville and Jimmy Buffett, or if you're just kind of familiar and that Margaritaville means drinks and fun, then, this is definitely going to be a great option for that. The crew was wonderful. Everyone was super duper friendly. Everyone was very excited to be on the ship. There is when you walk into the lobby, which is deck 5, there is a huge flip-flop statue, which is kind of standard for any of the Margaritaville resorts. So it was cool to walk in and see that and be like, all right, yeah, I'm used to seeing that when I'm at a Margaritaville property, and I'm seeing that now. So it's really cool. So I hope that this means that they will have, more ships and more offerings in the future. Margaritaville as a cruise ship, to me, just makes sense. So I would definitely encourage folks to go check it out if they're curious, and certainly keep an eye out in the future to see if things expand or are offered down the road. Well,
it sounds like the perfect way to change your latitude and attitude. So
I dig it.
Look at you.
You were like, if I had a scorecard right now, I'd be like, all right, I think we're in the A territory. Rock on.
we're working them in. Okay. Well, Dani, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this. If people want to catch up with you, once again, can you remind them where people could find you out there in social media, or where you may be able to answer their questions or just follow you in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on Twitter and Instagram at This Florida Life. And then I am editor for Orlando Date Night Guide and Orlando Parenting, which will be coming out hopefully very soon. The review for Margaritaville at Sea and the video is with Attractions Magazine.
And I actually went to Attractions Magazine before we started recording, and then I just used their search bar to put Margaritaville at Sea and was able to come up with the article that way.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure we put them in the show notes as well. Well, thank you so much, Dani, for coming on and sharing your experiences. It was wonderful talking with you today.
Thanks so much for having me.
All the best. And we look forward to either seeing you on a Disney ship over at Margaritaville at Sea, or just someplace out there on the sea when we're down in Florida. Thanks so much, Dani.
Thank you all.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Dani for coming on and sharing her experiences as she sailed on the beautiful Margaritaville at Sea, one of the newest cruise lines down here in Florida. And again, if you want to catch up with her, you can follow her over at Orlando Parenting and also Tampa Date Night. You can also follow her once again on Twitter at This Florida Life. Well, if you've been enjoying this podcast and know others who would enjoy it as well, we sure would appreciate it if you pass it along. That helps us get a little bit better known in the Disney cruising, and just the Disney podcasting community in general. And thank you so much for every one of you who have gone over, and once again, that helps people find our show and grow our audience. We do appreciate each and every one of you who have taken the time to do that. We also want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters. They bring this show to you each and every week ad-free. If you want to find out more about our Patreon program, you go to patreon.com/DCL podcast and find out all the information there. Well, between now and our next show, if you are heading out on a Disney cruise, if you're headed down to the parks, or you're headed on an Adventures by Disney trip of a lifetime, on behalf of myself, Steve, Christy, and Chris, all of us here at the DCL Podcast, we want to wish you to be well, enjoy time with family and friends, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.
The DCL Podcast is not affiliated with the Disney Cruise Line, Walt Disney Company, Adventures by Disney, or Run Disney. All of the opinions expressed on our shows are those of the hosts and the guests who appear on the show. If you have any questions about any of these products, please contact the Walt Disney Company.